They called it a curse because no one ever walked away from it whole. The story of the Apache Gold has been whispered across deserts and mining camps for more than a century, each version shaped by dust, blood, and the restless dreams of men who believed they could claim what should never have been touched. Like all great legends of the American West, it is part truth, part myth, and part something darker, a story bound not just in gold, but in sorrow. To tell it is to follow the footprints of fortune seekers into canyons where shadows hold secrets and mountains whisper warnings. And if you listen closely, you might feel why so many men believed the gold was cursed. It begins, as most frontier tales do, with land. Land that belonged to the Apache long before prospectors ever raised their pans or swung their picks. The mountains of Arizona, jagged and merciless, were home to stories as old as stone. Among the Apaches, it was said that beneath those peaks lay a treasure not meant for outsiders, a vein of gold so rich it gleamed even in darkness. Some say it was sacred, a gift from the earth to the people who guarded it. Others claimed it was a test, a trap set to lure greedy men to their doom. Either way, the Apache warned strangers away. But warnings in the Old West were like fences to cattle, more challenge than barrier. The legend most often circles back to one name, the lost Dutchman, a prospector of German descent, wandering the desert with a knack for finding veins where others swore none existed. He was said to have stumbled upon the mine, hidden deep in the Superstition Mountains where cliffs twist like broken teeth and trails vanish into shadows. The Dutchman returned to town with sacks of gold richer than any others, his eyes sunken but burning with something no one could name. He guarded his secret fiercely, whispering of landmarks, clues, and maps that seemed to change each time he repeated them. Some believe he feared the Apaches who watched from the ridges, waiting for him to trespass too far. Others say he feared the mine itself, the weight of its curse pressing heavier than the gold in his saddlebag. What made the mine legendary was not just its gold, but its body count. Men who sought it rarely came back, and those who did returned broken. Stories spread of prospectors found face down in the sand, their canteens full, their bodies untouched except for a look of terror frozen on their faces. Camps abandoned with meals half-cooked, gear scattered as if men had fled from something unseen. Skeletons discovered in caves, pickaxes still clutched in bony hands. Each tale added fuel to the fire, each death became proof of the curse. Yet none of it stopped the search. The harder the mine was to find, the more desperate men became to claim it. Cowboys riding the ranges told stories of nights when fires burned on ridgelines, flickering for a moment before vanishing, as if someone or something was watching. Prospectors spoke of phantom riders trailing them, silent and steady, never close enough to see clearly, never far enough to escape. Others swore they heard voices in the canyons, Apache war cries or ghostly whispers warning them to turn back. Those who ignored the warnings often disappeared, their names added to the long list of the lost. It was said the Superstition Mountains earned their name for this very reason, a place where logic dissolved, where shadows lingered too long, where even the bravest felt their courage falter. The story of the Apache Gold was never just about treasure. It was about obsession. Men left families, sold everything they owned, risked every drop of sweat and blood for a chance to uncover the mine. And once they began, they could not stop. They scribbled maps on scraps of paper, carved symbols into rocks, hid clues in journals only they could decipher. They wandered the desert for years, chasing mirages until their bodies gave out under the relentless sun. Their final breaths carried not prayers or farewells but muttered directions. A dry wash near a twisted tree, a canyon shaped like a horse's head, a rock that split the horizon. Clues that only deepened the mystery, and always, hovering over it all, the Apache themselves. To them, the mine was not lost. It was not hidden. It was protected. The land was theirs, and the treasure beneath it was not for strangers to steal. Some said warriors watched from the cliffs, bowstrings drawn, ensuring no prospector dug too deep. Others whispered that the curse itself was the Apache's doing, a spiritual guard against intruders, a reminder that greed has consequences. Whether through arrow or omen, the result was the same. Those who hunted the gold often found only death. Even lawmen, soldiers, and seasoned cowboys grew wary of the superstitions. They avoided the canyons whispered about in saloons, kept their herds clear of certain washes, and rode wide around landmarks marked as dangerous. The desert was hard enough without tempting fate. And yet for every dozen who rode away, there was always one who turned toward the peaks, certain that he would be the one to break the curse, the one to walk out heavy with gold and unscathed by legend. It was hope as much as greed that pulled them in. Hope that they could change their fortunes with a single discovery, that they could prove themselves tougher than those who fell before. But the desert has no mercy, and the Apache Gold, whether guarded by men, spirits, or fate itself, has never given itself up freely. That is why the story lives on, passed from campfire to campfire, barroom to barroom, whispered by those who believe and scoffed at by those who pretend not to, because deep down everyone wonders, what if it's true? What if somewhere in those rugged mountains lies a fortune untold, waiting for the one man bold enough or foolish enough to claim it? And what if that man, like all the others, finds that gold is not always a blessing but a curse? The curse tightened its grip on men the deeper they chased it. The Superstition Mountains were not gentle country, even for those who had no interest in the gold. Trails vanished under rock slides, storms rolled in without warning, and water holes turned dry when a man needed them most. Rattlesnakes waited in the shadows of boulders, and coyotes sang the nights hollow. But to the ones who hunted the mine, those dangers seemed almost ordinary compared to the dread that hung over the search itself. They spoke of a heaviness, a feeling that they were trespassers in a land that wanted them gone. The air was dry, but it felt suffocating, as if unseen eyes followed them every step of the way. Take the story of two Mexican miners, told and retold in saloons from Tucson to El Paso. They claimed to have stumbled onto the gold, not a scattered vein or a handful of flakes, but a mother lode so rich the walls of the mine seemed painted with it. They returned to town with saddlebags heavy enough to buy half the county. Yet their fortune lasted less than a week. The two were found dead in the desert, their throats cut, their supplies untouched. Some swore it was Apache warriors delivering punishment. Others whispered that the mine itself had demanded payment. Either way, the gold they carried vanished, and their discovery, if it was real, was buried once more in dust and silence. Then there was the prospector named Adams, who staggered into camp half-mad, his face blistered by sun and lips cracked by thirst. He raved about a hidden canyon, walls streaked with yellow, where nuggets could be picked straight from the sand. He swore he had filled his pockets before a shadow passed over him, and the ground itself seemed to shake. He never could explain what happened next, only that he woke outside the canyon with no memory of how he got there, his gold gone, his pockets empty. Adams spent the rest of his life trying to retrace his steps. He searched until his hair turned white, but he never found the canyon again. Some said he'd been touched by the curse, doomed to wander in circles, chasing a memory that would never lead him back. Every version of the tale added new names to the list of the lost. Some were treasure hunters, others were simple wanderers who disappeared after straying too close. Bodies were found with no signs of struggle, faces frozen in horror as if they had seen something unspeakable in their final moments. Horses returned riderless, packs still strapped, hooves bloody from days of wandering. Campsites stood deserted, fires still smoldering, as though men had risen mid-meal and fled into the night. These stories became warnings whispered to newcomers, yet they only fanned the flames of obsession. The mine was no longer just a legend of gold, it was a challenge. Every death seemed to say, "You will fail where others failed." And for some, that was invitation enough to try. The Apache themselves became figures of both fear and fascination in the stories. Riders claimed to see them on the ridges, silent silhouettes watching from above. Some believed the warriors had sworn a blood oath to protect the mine, killing any who dared trespass. Others insisted the Apaches needed no arrows, that their shamans had placed a curse on the land itself, one that drove intruders to madness or lured them into traps of stone and shadow. To the settlers and miners of the frontier, it was easier to blame spirits or curses than to admit the simple truth, that the mountains themselves were merciless, and anyone who underestimated them was bound for a shallow grave. Still, the mine refused to fade from memory. Maps surfaced like ghosts, hand-drawn sketches promising to lead the way. Each one was different, full of half-truths and riddles, yet each sold for small fortunes in smoky taverns. Men argued over landmarks that shifted with the light, a skull-shaped rock, a canyon that looked like a horse's head, a twisted mesquite tree. Whole expeditions set out with these maps in hand, returning weeks later with nothing but empty canteens and haunted eyes. Some maps were said to be forged, crafted by clever tricksters to bleed desperate men of their money. But others were believed to be genuine, their ink drawn from the last words of dying prospectors who had seen the mine and wanted to leave behind a clue, even if it meant dragging more souls into the curse. The legend grew so large it even reached men of science. Geologists and historians came, determined to prove that the mine was nothing but a myth, a tangle of greed and ghost stories. Yet even they admitted that the region held unusual veins, odd formations, glimmers of truth in a sea of fiction. And if one thing can be said about the frontier, it is that even the most educated men could not help but feel the pull of possibility. What if the mine was real? What if beneath all the tales of curses and skeletons lay a fortune untouched? That whisper was enough to keep the legend alive, passed from scholar to cowboy, from drifter to dreamer. By the late 1800s, the Superstition Mountains were not just a landmark, they were a graveyard of hope. Entire camps sprang up at their edges, full of men convinced they were close, always close, to breaking the curse. They dug shafts that collapsed, built trails that vanished, poured sweat and blood into the earth only to find more stone. And when they failed, others came to take their place. The story of the Apache Gold had become larger than any single prospector. It had become a story of the frontier itself, of hunger, ambition, and the dangerous line between hope and madness. But through it all, one thing remained constant. The gold, if it ever existed, was never claimed. Men carried fragments of it, yes, flakes, nuggets, a sack here or there. But the mine itself, the mother lode, the treasure that sparked the legend, never revealed itself fully. It was as if the land teased them, offering glimpses before snapping the door shut. Some said the Apaches moved the entrances, covering them with rock slides and brush. Others swore the mine itself shifted, vanishing like a mirage. And a few whispered the darkest theory of all, that the mine demanded lives in exchange for its riches, and until it was satisfied, no man could walk away with more than a handful. And so the curse deepened, fed by every death, every failed expedition, every whispered story around the fire. To some, it was superstition. To others, proof that the land itself guarded its secrets. But to all who heard it, the tale of the Apache Gold was a reminder of the West's greatest truth, that fortune comes at a cost, and sometimes that cost is more than a man can pay. The turn of the century should have ended the story. The frontier had been tamed, railroads stitched across the land, telegraphs wired even the loneliest towns into the wider world. But the Superstition Mountains remained stubbornly wild, a last corner of the West where legends breathed as heavily as the desert wind. And if anything, the story of the Apache Gold grew larger as the years passed, attracting a new breed of treasure hunter, not rugged prospectors with picks and mules, but men with maps, investors, and the certainty that modern methods could succeed where old boots had failed. They came with drills, with surveying gear, even with explosives, convinced that science would break the curse. But what they found instead was the same fate that had claimed so many before. One of the most famous of these was Adolf Ruth, a 70-something treasure hunter whose obsession with the lost Dutchman's mine consumed his final years. In 1931, he entered the Superstition Mountains carrying maps he believed led straight to the gold. He told reporters he would return a wealthy man, perhaps even solve one of the greatest mysteries of the West. Weeks later, his body was found in the desert, his skull pierced by a bullet. His maps were gone. Rumors swirled: had Apaches silenced him? Had rival treasure hunters murdered him? Or had the curse itself claimed yet another victim? To this day, no one knows. But Adolf Ruth's death became one of the most infamous chapters in the mine's bloody history, cementing its reputation as a place where obsession ended only in death. The 20th century produced not just tragedies, but oddities. Searchers reported finding skeletons with gear decades out of date, as if time itself swallowed men whole and spat them out later, forgotten by everyone but the desert. Pilots flying overhead claimed to see patterns of light flickering among the peaks like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Hikers returned with photographs showing strange shapes in the rocks' faces, figures, things that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Skeptics dismissed it as imagination, shadows playing tricks. But those who believed in the curse saw it as proof that the superstitions were not just mountains, but something alive, something watching. The strangest stories were those of men who returned alive but broken. One expedition in the 1940s staggered out of the desert days overdue, their packs empty, their eyes hollow. They would not speak of what had happened inside the mountains, only that they would never go back. One of them, drunk in a tavern years later, confessed that they had found something not gold, but a cave filled with carvings, symbols etched into the walls, old and angry. He swore they had heard voices inside, whispering in a tongue none of them understood. They fled, leaving behind their tools, their hopes, everything. When asked where the cave was, he would only shake his head, saying, "The mountains took it back." By the 1950s, the story of the Apache Gold was no longer just a prospector's tale. It had become American folklore, printed in newspapers, chronicled in books, whispered on radio shows. The lost Dutchman's mine, as it was more often called now, attracted tourists and scholars alike. Yet the more people sought it, the more the curse seemed to spread. Accidents became common: hikers lost in the desert, campers vanishing overnight, bodies discovered in shallow washes. Search parties scoured the superstitions so often that the local sheriffs knew the trails better than their own backyards. And always the story was the same. Men went in with dreams of gold and the desert swallowed them whole. Some tried to turn the legend into profit. Museums displayed authentic nuggets claimed to be from the mine, though most were proven false. Entertainers staged expeditions, playing up the curse for curious crowds. Even Hollywood dipped its toes into the legend, weaving the lost Dutchman into movies and Western serials. But for all the stage lights and newspaper ink, the curse never lost its bite. Each new disappearance, each strange death, reminded people that the story was more than just entertainment. Something in those mountains resisted being turned into spectacle. Something in those canyons demanded respect. The Apaches, too, remained part of the legend, their role evolving as the decades passed. Some elders told reporters that the mine was real but sacred, a place tied to their ancestors and not meant for white men. Others refused to speak of it at all, as if naming it would give it power. And among treasure hunters, this silence only deepened the mystery. If the people who had lived in those mountains for centuries would not speak of the gold, then surely it must exist. Surely they were guarding something too powerful to reveal. The silence became its own kind of evidence, feeding the hunger of those who sought the mine. Yet the strangest thing was how the Superstition Mountains seemed to shift with each generation. Landmarks described in old journals no longer matched the terrain. Canyons widened, cliffs crumbled, washes rerouted by floods. Some blamed erosion, the slow work of nature. But among the faithful, the explanation was clear. The mountains themselves were hiding the mine, reshaping themselves to guard it forever. It wasn't just cursed. They said it was alive. And alive things don't give up their secrets easily. Modern technology only fueled the fire. Metal detectors, aerial surveys, satellite images, all were brought to bear on the mystery. None succeeded. If anything, the failures added more weight to the curse. Here, in an age where men could split atoms and send rockets into the sky, the mine remained untouchable. A stubborn reminder that some mysteries resist even the sharpest tools. The superstitions mocked technology the way they had mocked superstition. They needed no help from spirits or arrows. Their silence was its own defense, and so the curse of the Apache Gold endured, passing from dusty saloons to glossy documentaries, from old prospectors' journals to internet forums buzzing with modern treasure hunters. Some believed it was all a hoax, a patchwork of lies stitched together by desperate men. Others swore it was real, that proof was out there waiting for the right hand to uncover it. But whether skeptic or believer, all agreed on one thing. The story refused to die. Like the desert itself, it endured, whispering to anyone willing to listen. What kept it alive was not just the promise of gold, but the deeper pull of mystery. In an age where the world felt smaller, where maps were filled in and secrets laid bare, the lost Dutchman's mine remained an untamed corner of imagination. It offered more than wealth. It offered the chance to touch something unknown, to prove oneself against the same curse that had swallowed so many before. For some, that was worth more than gold. For others, it was a temptation too strong to resist, and so the search continued, decade after decade, with each generation adding new names to the list of the lost, new maps to the pile of forgeries, new theories to the endless debate. The curse did not weaken with time. If anything, it grew stronger, fed by every soul who believed, every man who vanished, every whisper carried on the desert wind. And if you stand at the edge of the Superstition Mountains today, staring at those jagged peaks burning red in the sunset, you can almost hear the story breathing. The land is waiting, always waiting, for the next man bold enough to try. The curse of the Apache Gold has never loosened its grip, not through centuries of searching, not through advances in technology, not even through the skepticism of modern times. If anything, it has only deepened, fed by every unanswered question, every disappearance, every whisper that rises on the desert wind. The Superstition Mountains still stand as they always have, jagged and unyielding, their cliffs casting shadows that seem longer than the sun should allow. And inside those shadows, the story waits, always hungry for the next dreamer bold enough or foolish enough to step inside. Even today, the list of those who have sought the mine reads like a roll call of the doomed. Hikers vanish on well-worn trails. Searchers collapse from heat stroke only yards from safety. Amateur adventurers enter the canyons with gear worth thousands, only to be carried out empty, their hopes burned away by the desert sun. Each new tragedy fuels the legend, each headline reminding the world that the curse is not confined to the dusty pages of history. It is alive, still claiming lives in an age where no mystery should remain unsolved. Yet perhaps that is the greatest lure of all. In a world mapped by satellites, measured by science, and explained by logic, the lost Dutchman's mine remains untouchable. It is a puzzle without an answer, a question without a solution, and men by their nature are drawn to such things. The gold is part of it, yes, but it is the mystery that keeps them coming back. They are not only searching for treasure, they are searching for proof that some corners of the earth remain wild, that some stories are bigger than science, that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. The Apaches knew this long before the first prospector swung a pick in those mountains. To them, the land was sacred, not because of the gold, but because it demanded respect. They saw in the cliffs and canyons something that outsiders could not understand, something not meant to be owned or mined. The warnings they gave were not born of greed but of wisdom. And yet, to men blinded by the promise of wealth, wisdom often looks like superstition. They ignored the warnings and in doing so stepped into a story that would consume them. The curse, if it exists, is not simply about death. It is about obsession. It takes root in a man's mind, whispering that he is different, that he is smarter, tougher, luckier than those who came before. It drives him deeper into the mountains, farther from safety, until he cannot stop even when he knows he should. And when the desert finally claims him, the curse has already done its work. The body is just proof of what the mind surrendered long before. Legends have a way of shaping themselves to fit the times. In the 1800s, the curse was whispered among cowboys and prospectors, carried on trails where news traveled slowly. In the 1900s, it spread through newspapers, through radio, through the early glow of Hollywood. And now, in the 21st century, it lives online, in forums buzzing with speculation, in YouTube videos mapping out theories, in social media posts where dreamers trade riddles and half-truths. The curse has adapted, but it has never weakened. Each retelling gives it new life, each believer adds new fuel to its fire. And perhaps that is the real heart of the story, that the curse is not only in the mountains but in us. We want to believe. We want to believe that there are still hidden places, still mysteries strong enough to resist us, still treasures so powerful that they demand sacrifice. The Apache Gold, whether it exists as a physical mine or only as a legend, gives us that. It is not just about wealth. It is about wonder. And wonder, as history has shown, can be just as dangerous as gold. Stand at the edge of the superstitions at dusk, when the light turns the cliffs blood red, and you will feel it. The desert grows quiet. The shadows stretch long, and the air feels heavier than it should. Somewhere in those mountains, men swear, lies the gold. But somewhere in those mountains, too, lies something else, something waiting, watching, guarding. Call it spirits, call it the land itself, call it a curse. Whatever name you give it, the feeling is the same, that this is not a place to be trifled with, and yet someone even now is planning their journey, packing gear, studying maps, memorizing the landmarks of old journals. They will step into those canyons with a heart full of hope and a head full of determination. They will tell themselves they are ready, that they will be the one to succeed where so many have failed. And maybe they will, or maybe their name will be added to the long list of those who vanished. Another echo swallowed by the desert, another victim of the curse of the Apache Gold. So the story continues, as it always has, as it always will. A curse that feeds on curiosity, a legend that refuses to die, a treasure that may or may not exist. And whether you believe the mine is real or only a myth, one truth cannot be denied. The Superstition Mountains have claimed more than their share of souls, and they are not finished yet. Because the desert does not forget, and the gold, if it is there, will never give itself up freely. And maybe, just maybe, that is how it was always meant to be.